There's some real opportunities for co-investing in areas like green or even the future of care. The problem is we have a very problematic relationship currently between public and private. At best, we think of the role of policy as simply facilitating the wealth creation process. And so what I talked about was that if we actually look at the history of some big technological changes that occurred over the last 200 years, had the public seen itself as simply facilitating, at best fixing market failures, we would not have the internet, we would not have GPS, we would not have Siri, we would not have clean energy. And so we need to rethink the role of public and private as co-investing together, as actually also organizationally being dynamic and innovative and explorative just as much in the public as the private. So building learning organizations within the state that can both take risks but also learn from mistakes to invest in the next round. But currently ideology is preventing us from getting there. So I was encouraging people in the audience to drop ideological thinking, drop the politics, and actually to rethink the opportunities of the future. And it must begin by shaping a new type of conversation. There's different sicknesses out there right now in the real economy. The problem is that we have the wrong diagnosis of that sickness, so the medicine is the wrong one. We often hear that the problem is simply a lack of incentives. So we might focus on tax incentives or getting rid of or changing certain types of regulations. What actually I think is that one of the biggest sicknesses we have is financialization of both the financial sector, which is not doing its job, it's basically financing itself, not the real economy, and the real economy itself is financialized. You increasingly have companies making choices, problematic choices, to not reinvest profits into the opportunities of the future, whether they be around research and development, whether they be around human capital, whether they be around green investment, so steering the direction of the future. And so by definancializing industry and by reorienting finance towards actually doing interesting things for the economy, I think already that would be a huge solution. The other sickness is the one that I was talking about today, which is a sick conversation between public and private, where the public sector is so easily captured by special interests, by special pleas, because it no longer is confident about its role. It's constantly being told it's an impediment to get out of the way, or at best to simply fix things in an incremental way. And that creates a real lack of confidence and a lack of understanding of what its real role should be, which is financing the wave of the future, which I do think today must be something around green, but it's not about, putting all your eggs in one basket. But in order to do that, you have to be quite confident about creating value, not just facilitating it. And we should even reinvent the word public value. I formed a new institute which is all about actually reinventing public value within economic theory. At best we talk about the public good, but it's such a narrow concept that it's just about sort of fixing a problem. And as soon as public sector does more than that, they're told to stop because they're crowding out business, and so you get a lack of ambition. As an economist, what I can say is that I believe the science that's out there. I know very few scientists who are even doubting that there's climate change. The real question is what to do about it. And economically, the problem is that if you just see it as a problem of tinkering on the edges, or at best creating certain policies which create a more certain environment for business, you still don't get the kind of revolutionary investments which led to a big IT revolution. So if we want a green revolution, we should do what Bill Gates says, and he read my book, he brought me out to Seattle to talk about it. He says we must learn from IT where the government led and business followed. Today the government is not leading enough across enough countries, and so you don't actually get business following. On top of that, you have businesses that are being rewarded for short-term investments instead of long-term investments, and you have the public sector which is not ambitious and confident enough to say, actually, you know what, let's do something really interesting, which is a total green transformation of every sector. But there we should learn from the few experiments that are actually, I don't want to say working perfectly, but achieving some interesting results, and that would include Energiewende in Germany, which has not just been about wind or solar. It's been about transforming all sectors. So the steel industry in Germany has massively reduced its material content through repurpose, reuse, and recycle. And they did that actually because the government took on this bold and ambitious policy around an energy transformation. And what's also interesting from the German example is that unlike the moon project, where it was one guy, Kennedy, who said, let's go to the moon, in Germany it was actually civil society that for decades fought through a green movement to get legitimacy and an understanding in civil society how important this was, which made it much easier than for Merkel to implement Energiewende. But equally important is understanding that the solutions must be bottom up. You cannot have politicians telling business what the solutions are. You can give business a challenge, a direction, and then enable and reward those bottom-up solutions. Going to the moon required 12 different sectors, 400 homework problems. Same thing will be required for achieving a green revolution. First of all, Apple is a great company with really smart people inside Apple. This is not about saying that Apple was not responsible for the iPhone. It's simply that the narrative is so skewed. And Plato reminds us, storytellers rule the world. So if we tell the wrong story about Apple and forget that in a 700-page book on Steve Jobs, there's not one page on all the public investments which make the smartphone a smartphone and not a stupid phone, that's a problem. So the internet, GPS, Siri, touchscreen, which make all our smart products smart, we're all publicly financed. Now, this could also, if the public officials kind of knew the story, knew how to talk about it, create even stronger pressure for these companies to be paying their tax. Because at best we hear, hey, you use the roads, you use an educated workforce, pay your tax like everyone else. But the motor, the engine of their profits actually also comes from this risk-taking public investment. So this isn't, this should also help us in the tax battle, but it's much more than that. This is also about making sure that these profits are reinvested back into the economy. Apple today is actually overly financialized. It's not plowing back the profits. And this is also very important because not all companies are like that. There's choices to be made. Ericsson and Huawei, for example, are two companies in telecoms that actually are very functional in terms of not being so financialized. Cisco, Pfizer, and Apple are increasingly financialized. This whole issue of there's different choices to be made, there's heterogeneous actors, is a positive message. We are humans. We can make choices. We might make wrong choices in terms of corporate governance. Maybe we should go into reverse mode, learn what's working. And I think Austria is interesting because you do have a stakeholder governance structure here, which is not perfect. It doesn't mean everything's perfect in Austria, but it's one of the lessons of what works. And you combine that with the Silicon Valley model, and wouldn't that be interesting? Because actually in Silicon Valley, the public school system is massively suffering because these companies don't see themselves as having been co-created by public and private, and so they're not kind of investing back into the common good.